The middle cranial fossa is shaped like a butterfly. Which is narrow and shallow in the middle. And wide and deep on each side. The lateral area of middle cranial fossa is formed by the following bones. Number 1, greater wing of sphenoid. Number 2, squamous part of temporal bones. And number 3, anterior surface of petrous temporal bone. As I have already mentioned, the lateral area of middle cranial fossa is deep and it lodges the temporal lobe of the brain. The lateral area of middle cranial fossa is related anteriorly to the orbit. Laterally to the temporal fossa. The temporal fossa, marked in green, is a shallow depression on the side of the skull, and inferiorly it is related to the infratemporal fossa. Infratemporal fossa is an irregularly shaped cavity situated below and medial to zygomatic arch. The position of the index finger in the diagram below refer to the location of infratemporal fossa. It is clearly observable that the infratemporal fossa is located deep or medial to the zygomatic arch, and it is communicating above with the temporal fossa. The lateral area of middle cranial fossa is connected to the orbit via superior orbital fissure. So the superior orbital fissure opens anteriorly into the orbit. It is bounded above by the lesser wing. Below by the greater wing. And medially by the body of sphenoid. The medial end of superior orbital fissure is wider than the lateral end. The long axis of the fissure is directed laterally upward and forward. And the lower border of superior orbital fissure is marked by a small projection which provides attachment to the common tendinous ring of Zinn. This ring divides the superior orbital fissure into three parts: lateral, intermediate, and medial. The three parts of the superior orbital fissure transmit the following structures. First, the lateral part. It transmits A. Lacrimal nerve, B. Frontal nerve, C. Trochlear nerve, and D. Superior ophthalmic vein. The first two, that is the lacrimal nerve and the frontal nerve, are the divisions of ophthalmic division of trigeminal nerve. The ophthalmic division of trigeminal nerve is subdivided into lacrimal, frontal, and nesociliary nerves. Of these three divisions, the lacrimal and frontal passes through the lateral part of the superior orbital fissure. Coming to the middle part, it transmits upper and lower division of oculomotor nerve. Upper and lower division of oculomotor nerve, which is the third cranial nerve. Next, Nesociliary nerve in between the two divisions of the oculomotor. The nesociliary nerve is a division coming out of the ophthalmic division of trigeminal nerve that I have already mentioned. And it also transmits the abducent nerve. which is the sixth cranial nerve. So oculomotor nerve, which is the third cranial nerve, abducent nerve, which is the sixth cranial nerve, and Nesociliary nerve, which is actually a branch from the ophthalmic division. Ophthalmic division in turn comes from the trigeminal nerve. So that means Nesociliary nerve is actually a part of trigeminal or fifth cranial nerve. Coming to the medial part. Medial part of the superior orbital fissure transmits number 1 inferior ophthalmic vein, number 2 sympathetic nerves from the plexus around the internal carotid artery. Here I must mention that the optic canal communicates the median region of middle cranial fossa with the orbit. And this optic canal transmits the optic nerve and ophthalmic artery. The greater wing of sphenoid presents the following features. First is the foramen rotundum. The foramen rotundum leads anteriorly to the pterygopalatine fossa. This pterygopalatine fossa contain the pterygopalatine ganglia. The foramen rotundum transmits the maxillary nerve, which is one of the three terminal branches of trigeminal nerve. It is to be mentioned that the trigeminal nerve divides into ophthalmic, maxillary and mandibular divisions. The foramen ovale lie posterolateral to the foramen rotundum. And it leads inferiorly to the infratemporal fossa. Through the foramen oval, the following structures are transmitted, which can be remembered by the mnemonic MEL. So the structures transmitted through the foramen oval are as follows. Number 1, the mandibular nerve. Number 2, the accessory meningeal artery. Number 3, the lesser petrosal nerve. And number 4, an emissary vein which connect the cavernous sinus with the pterygoid plexus of vein. So this emissary vein connects the cavernous sinus with the pterygoid plexus of veins. Okay. The foramen spinosum lies posterolateral to the foramen oval. And it also leads inferiorly to the infratemporal fossa. The foramen spinosum transmits the middle meningeal artery the meningeal branch of mandibular nerve, which is known as nervus spinosus, and the posterior trunk of middle meningeal vein. The emissary sphenoidal foramina or foramen of Vesalius transmits an emissary vein connecting the cavernous sinus with the pterygoid plexus of veins. So an emissary vein passes through the foramen of Vesalius, which connects the cavernous sinus with the pterygoid plexus of veins. When present, the canaliculus innominatus, which is also a very small foramen, it transmits the lesser petrosal nerve. instead of foramen oval. The foramen lacerum lies at the posterior end of the carotid groove. Posteromedial to the foramen oval. This foramen lacerum is an aperture which is located between the sphenoid, apex of petrous temporal, and basilar part of occipital bone. The foramen lacerum has got an upper part and a lower part. During life, the lower part of foramen lacerum is filled with cartilage and no significant structure passes through the whole length of the canal except for the meningeal branch of ascending pharyngeal artery and an emissary vein from the cavernous sinus. However, the upper part of foramen is traversed by the internal carotid artery with venous and sympathetic plexuses around it. In the anterior part of the foramen, the greater petrosal nerve unites with the deep petrosal nerve. To form the nerve of pterygoid canal or Vidian's nerve. Which leaves the foramen by entering the pterygoid canal located in the anterior wall of foramen lacerum. The anterior surface of petrous temporal bone presents the following features. Number 1, the trigeminal impression. It lies near the apex of the petrous part of temporal bone behind the foramen lacerum. It lodges the trigeminal ganglia. Next, hiatus and groove for the greater petrosal nerve. They are present lateral to the trigeminal impression and they lead to the foramen lacerum. The greater petrosal nerve is a branch of facial nerve. Next, the hiatus and groove for the lesser petrosal nerve. It lies lateral to the hiatus for the greater petrosal nerve. They lead to the foramen ovale or to canaliculus innominatus to relay to the otic ganglion. Next is the arcuate eminence, which is present still more lateral to the previous landmarks, and it is produced by the superior semicircular canal. Next is the Tigman Timpani, which is a thin plate of bone anterolateral to the arcuate eminence. It forms a continuous sloping roof for the tympanic cavity, mastoid antrum, and also for the canal for tensor tympani. The lower edge of Tigman Timpani divides the squamotympanic fissure into petrosquamous and petrotympanic parts. Squamotympanic fissure into petrosquamous and petrotympanic part. The cerebral surface of squamous temporal bone is concave and it shows impressions for the temporal lobe and groups for the branches of middle meningeal vessel. The middle meningeal artery enters the middle cranial fossa through the foramen spinosum. In the middle cranial fossa, it runs laterally and forward and grooves the squamous part of temporal bone and then divides into anterior or frontal branch, and posterior or parietal branch. With that, we have concluded the lateral part of middle cranial fossa.